Presently, she is the chairperson of the board of the Pakistan Stock Exchange, PICG, Karandas and Sui Southern Gas Company Limited, and an independent director in the Agro Fertilizer Limited. Please welcome Dr. Shamshad Akhtar.
Okay, I needed to help myself to be able to be seen across. So first of all, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum to everybody. I think I'm not being an accountant and not being affiliated with IFRS or with the sustainability reporting, I'm not sure how much sense will I make to this particular audience who's very specialized. I can just share with you a few thoughts. I'm here because we have been working on ESG at the PSX and PICG, but also because I have been involved in the sustainable development, finance, and Paris Accord matters from, say, 2014 onwards very intensively, and was involved very heavily prior to that, even in the negotiations of it. My first message, and I'll have 5-6 messages, but first one is that we are sitting in Pakistan, and Pakistan's climate vulnerabilities has brought to forefront sustainability risk. It's also referred as ESG risk, as all of you know. Pakistan being within the top 10 ranked most climate vulnerable countries, we have to worry about the standards of reporting disclosures and everything around it. In our corridors, glaciers are already melting, temperatures are rising, and sea level is also rising. So mainstreaming sustainability to promote green and sustainable growth is quite critical. It, of course, calls for developing a substantive agenda by shifting to low carbon pathways, by raising the share of the renewables in our energy mix and reducing our reliance on higher emission fuels, rationalizing sector policy frameworks by abolishing subsidies, pricing, and tax incentive distortions. And all this will come in the disclosure in one form or the other that I'm talking about, because everything that I'm saying will have a material and a financial impact, and how we are going to be able to track the sustainability reporting at the end of the day. So for decades, we have promoted reckless consumption and production in our country, like everywhere else globally. So embracing sustainability across public and private sector to arrest the drift in climate change while mainstreaming climate response in the budgets, finance, and businesses is quite critical. Promoting ESG integration to enhance value creation, something that was just talked about by Sohail, and to nurture business resilience to create gains for shareholders and investors, which in turn has potential to generate demand pressures for ESG and climate action. Managing ESG risks that have negative impact on assets, P&L, and earnings. Conversely, if are effectively managed, it will enhance the value proposition and reputation of the companies. So I think the fact that IFRS and the international community have got together to establish this international sustainability reporting standards is extremely powerful tool for us as an economist and developmental people who were involved in developing the goals, targets, and indicators, but are now struggling to see what the impact of all this is in different contexts. So I very much welcome this, and it is amazing that ICAP is at the frontier of not only deciphering what the disclosure drafts are, which will be extremely helpful for non-accountants like us, but also trying to figure out how this will be operationalized within our context. So now turning from the background architecture that I was laying out, I'd like to convey my second message, which is Pakistan's sustainability drive is underway, but progress and impact is uneven. So what we will find very soon when we are unraveling the technicalities of reporting, that actually the database is very weak, and reporting happens when you have database. Sustainability reporting is contingent on, of course, action. So the good news for us is that Pakistan did legislate the Sustainable Development Goals and is working towards its nationally defined contribution scenarios to contribute to the ambitions of the Paris Climate Accord, which, as we know, the scientific evidence is pushing that we have to be extremely ambitious globally. And we are also promoting sustainable finance, which is the bedrock of sustainability and climate resilience. The most exciting was really the Climate Change Act in 2017 to some of us, because prior to that, Environment Ministry was not really functioning. I can't promise you that the Climate Ministry is functioning, but having dealt with them, at least the good news is that there has been establishment of the Ministry of Climate Change that actually finally approved a climate policy and strategy, which of course underscores climate mitigation and adaptation, safeguarding biodiversity, etc. And imagine we will have to be delving into the sustainability reporting on these scores eventually. So quality of action in Pakistan, being a federated state, is at the provincial and city level. This is the saddest part of our, it's really a major dilemma, because there's too much of lack of action on this frontier, when everywhere that I have been looking at, particularly Asia, which has been my specialization, that carbon neutrality starts with the federal government, but then it cascaded down to the states and to the cities. And nothing of this sort has happened. I have presented a paper to the Think 20 of the G20, which actually looked at the carbon neutrality down to the subnational government level. And that matters a lot for what you are going to do in terms of sustainability reporting. This other good news after legislation of the Sustainable Development Goals, Climate Change Act, the ministry, I think the more exciting is the alternative and renewable energy policy plans to raise clean energy share in energy mix to 30%. And some good things are happening, including also the electric vehicle policy. So that gives you some substance there to be looking at. In midst of COVID-19, several refinancing facilities have served different sectors and broadened also the social safety net. But jury is out on their impact on resilience, or for that matter, on sustainability. Now, implementation of SDGs and climate action, which you require for sustainability reporting, it's important to recognize that the core elements of sustainability have been hampered by the lack of leadership, resource constraint, and disruptions caused by COVID-19, which has reversed the progress in poverty reduction and magnified inequalities, and now the growing macroeconomic vulnerabilities in the past few months that entail severe social implications, and city flooding, as we are experiencing, is revealing the infrastructure deficits. Now, did I do something wrong to be subjected to, or is it a signal to, Asha, please, isko ban kar de. We need to safeguard climate. So, managing sustainability and its reporting in federated structure with provinces and cities and handling environment, to me, is the most challenging task that you would face when you are adapting all this to Pakistan. Now, of course, the EU architecture is fascinating, and I have to tell you, as somebody who's been looking at EU and ASEAN, there is phenomenal advancement on all these frontiers. ASEAN, I have worked on myself on the sustainability, but EU is something we all are fascinated because it's a union and there's a lot of emphasis on the climate. So let me move to my third message, having defined our climate challenges and also what we have been doing in Pakistan to lay this, to set the scene out. Now, here comes my core point, the third message. To me, finance has to be a major driver of promoting sustainability and within that context, ESG integration. It, of course, calls for enhancement of financial policy and regulatory architecture to align with sustainable banking and finance network guidelines, something that was created when I was at the UN. As a step in this direction, the good news is that the State Bank has issued green banking guidelines, and SCCP issued guidelines for green bond, impact investments, and few other things, including the gender bond. Most path-breaking news for all of us is that PSX has joined the league this year of sustainable stock exchanges. It's taken me, since I joined PSX, to bring PSX to move to that frontier. So moving forward, I'm also counting that PSX will join the United Nations Sustainable Stock Exchanges initiative. Now, all this has implication for reporting, because everything that I have talked about, the green banking guidelines, the SCCP advisories, and the PSX joining SEC, World Federation of Stock Exchanges, in trying to develop sustainable stock exchanges, will lay the foundation for the reporting guidelines in different segments of the financial markets of Pakistan. So we had yesterday a session, and I will tell you in what context later on, with a handful of the banks, about 14, 15, the technicians who are involved in sustainability reporting. Now, why did I push for consultation with the banks? Was that banks constitute a large proportion of our financial assets, and not the non-banking sector, which is contrary to the developed country models. And if reporting and regulatory architecture gets right, we will have the ability to price sustainability and ESG risk, which is crucial for the accountants at the end of the day. Banks will come under pressure for promoting sustainable finance from eventually not only the borrowers, but also the lenders, but also from the boards, shareholders, and investors who will demand technical climate disclosure, something that has been talked about. So an analysis of a sample of 18 banks reveals the sustainability in credit approvals has yet to unfold in a major way, and it's only happened in selective banks that do sustainability reviews of their portfolios. Banks are investing in renewables, undoubtedly, for a variety of reasons, and encouraging effective deployment of corporate social responsibility budgets of their own, and some have declared no coal financing, which is a very important step, and have set up mechanisms to evaluate and annually publish impact and sustainability reports. And I have with me now almost 15 sustainability reports, which are not as bad as 600 reporting guidelines globally that exist, which make it very difficult to figure out how do you come up with a consistent, coherent standard, and hence the value proposition of the international standard reporting body, which is going to come up with a consolidated approach to it. So for us who are working on ESG in Pakistan, it's important to work on reporting guidelines as soon as possible so that we are able to measure and evaluate the impact. So building on Code of Corporate Governance and CSR voluntary guidelines, which incorporate elements of ESG, SCCP has now issued a brief note on roadmap of ESG, which was based on the work that we had started off under the ESG task force that I will talk about at the end. And State Bank is also undertaking technical work to this effect. So I think by the time you are unraveling the global sustainability baseline and evaluating that and setting the scene for Pakistan, some additional evidence will emerge, which will be very useful in all this work, as I see. Now, financial markets are the only place where we can realign public savings and capital flows towards sustainable investment by adopting sustainability in risk management frameworks. At the same time, we need to, of course, assess for technical financial disclosure purposes the physical risks from climate change and disasters and the collapse of businesses that follow, and also collapse of supply chain that happen when disasters or climate change unfolds in a bigger manner. And also we have to assess the transition risk that stem from the cost of unsustainable activities, which is likely to go up with the suspension of lending to high emitters and polluters, and if the carbon taxes are imposed as something that is being pushed by the IMF and World Bank and other financial institutions and G20 now. So all this, when eventually takes hold, will trigger loan defaults. Hence, ESG risks need to become an embedded activity in all activities. And ESG and sustainability, to me, are always used interchangeably. So where do I collect my knowledge from is a body of institutions that I have worked in context of my interface with G20, because I was Sherpa and the finance person of the United Nations for 5 years in the G20. So I have seen and worked closely with the Financial Stability Board, less with international accounting bodies, but they have a very important role to play, ranging from IFRS, and now added to it is the newly established International Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. But I have worked with Bank of International Settlements that have embraced now the International Sustainability Accounting Board, and this is Pillar 3 of the BIS standards. The network for greening and financial system, which is a body of almost 100 plus central banks, and it's a very powerful body because all the governors are working very closely on this frontier. IASCO is another platform, and the World Federation of Exchange, as I pointed out, is important, but also commodity trading standard setter, or central bankers and heads of stock exchange, all are galvanized by the sustainable financing platforms and UN Global Compact to harness ESG and sustainability. So why have I talked about all these international institutions? Is that Pakistan will have to draw guidance from all these platforms because it's all over the place. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, and everything has to be pulled from all these different parts. So Pakistan has to develop national roadmaps, regulatory frameworks, and guidelines for its industry and the entire value chain, as I see. So let me now come to my fourth message before I conclude, which is, besides the financial markets and financing bodies, or for that matter, the banks or non-banks, I think it's important for us that corporate and financial institutions align and mainstream sustainability in business strategy and in the governance structure. So you all know this much more, but I think there is so much work to be done in Pakistan that I think even if we all worked unitedly as a team, we will be able to make a dent on conceptualizing and understanding this. So industry, businesses, and financial intermediaries need to adjust product and customer portfolios, offer sustainable financing, and incorporate ESG risk in pricing, risk management, in capital charge that the banks have to have as a part of the Basel. And of course, it all depends on how much commitment we have to net zero emission to allow for all these cushion and reserves that we have within the banking statements or corporate statements. I have to admit that I find from the international landscape, Pakistan pretty behind. Although lately some reports have said we are in the neighborhood of the developing countries, but I'm not as yet comfortable with that statement. So Pakistan will have to deal with, at some point, even if it is in a denial mode, it'll help to deal with stranded assets saga. Because I was in one of the economic advisory groups where we were talking about all these refineries, which are major polluters, and I don't know what we will do, and they're very inefficient and they need to be shut down, was the recommendation of the Energy Task Force within the economic advisory. And that has implication for whatever we are going to be talking about. And now no coal financing policy in Pakistan. Of course, we have had a leadership change, so I don't know what it means eventually. So we take one step and we take two steps backward. It complicates us. But industry, business, and financial intermediaries will have to offer sustainable financing. and they will have to incorporate ESG, risk in pricing, risk management, and in capital charge that I talked about, but it all depends on their commitment to net zero emissions. Now, with already Pakistan has a green prudential regulatory regime, which is extremely helpful for what we are going to do, because it recognizes, it gives weightage, aggressive, adverse weightage to the brown finance, and it gives prudential support for green finance and other such measures which are likely to change corporate and finance dynamics as you are working on it eventually. Financing green infrastructure is also a very big area. It, of course, would help enhance resilience and bring in just transition because it will safeguard people and the planet's ecosystem. ESG drivers will work if financial industry and corporate sector are aligned and incentivized through regulatory regime to catalyze ESG action. A coordinated demand and supply push is warranted from standard setters, and accounting bodies are standard setters too. Corporate stakeholders and financial sector will not move until and unless standard setters move from voluntary to compulsory compliance eventually in Pakistan context, because nobody believes when you leave it voluntary. Good news is, of course, that at COP26, Pakistan's companies recognize the virtues of moving to net zero emissions, an important component of the first pillar of ESG, the environment. I say that because we work incredibly hard to get over a dozen companies to commit to net zero emissions at COP26. I'm representing a body called Pakistan Environment Trust Fund, which is working basically to push for a climate change agenda and then carbon pricing and some of these areas, which all will go into all the work that you will be doing. Now, of course, it is important that whatever we do, we deploy resources effectively, and resource efficiency has to be at the center stage of it, which often gets unrecognized because we are looking at the big emissions but not looking at resource efficiency, whether it is energy efficiency. So we have to have matrix for all those other areas too. Now, it has been well recognized, and I think you have to really emphasize that the boards of the companies have a very important role to play, because if you leave it to the management, they would find the easy way out. But of course, since the board includes the shareholders, they are more concerned on the financial returns than non-financial metrics that have financial implications, as has been pointed out. So ESG risk and materiality profile has to be properly organized, recognizing its strength go beyond sustainability. For example, a company can have net zero emissions, zero waste, renewable power facilities, etc. But ESG requires it to go beyond and meets the social obligations, labor, health, and safety standards. We at Karandas have established what is called Infrazamin, which is a credit enhancement organization, private body for infrastructure, and they are actually mainstreaming social obligation, labor, health, and safety standards in the credit enhancement mechanism. So if a Pakistan company comes for credit enhancement for infrastructure, they would have to abide by these standards. So we are holding our partners pretty rigorously to some of this stuff. Conversely, a company might have comprehensive ESG reporting or sustainability reporting, backed by even strong governance and welfare framework, but its core manufacturing and business processes and practices would be contributing to emissions and pollution whose adversities risk people and planet. So whether you do it directly or you do it indirectly, it matters. But if you do it collectively, it will be the most powerful force. And I think this has to be recognized in the sustainability stuff. Now, ESG frameworks adopted by companies need to be embedded in SDGs, and that is why I spent in the beginning laying down where we are in the SDG frameworks, what work we are doing as a country. And as you may have guessed, not a lot, frankly. We are behind in terms of the goals, targets, and indicators. But all this is really ammunition for you. If they move on SDGs, then you will have sustainability. Otherwise, if they don't, you don't have sustainability. So complexities, of course, abound as ESG investing space has been mired by what is called in the literature alphabet soup of standards, the GRIs, the TCFD, CDP, etc., which are conveying information on sustainability performance, but neither the reporting nor the assessments can be done in a holistic, coordinated fashion. So let me say that unlike financial disclosures that enjoy a degree of standards conformity, the company's sustainability disclosures do not conform to shared standards, but depend on choices of the firm make for their sustainability assessments. I was speaking on ESG just 2 days back, and every corporate leader said, I'm doing sustainability reporting. And why are you questioning my CSR? Because I said CSR is not ESG. And that offended the corporate leaders because they counted as ESG. So what complicates standardization and comparability are, of course, the proliferation of disclosure frameworks and standards, which are phenomenal in number across the globe. For example, the sustainability reporting requirements, such as mandated by industry standards setters, regulators, or stock exchanges. Now, we will come up with our rules and regulations for reporting standards, and I'll tell you what work we are doing there. And, of course, the GRI standards have been at the frontier, and they have spoken pretty aggressively when this body was established. They, of course, are a part of it, but they are saying they are much more ahead of the game than anybody else. But there are 77 industry-specific standards of sustainability accounting standards board, as I see. While companies apply their own discretion on selecting standards, a rationalization of sustainability reporting standards would help manage assessments, impacts, and respond effectively to sustainability trends such as climate change and issues stemming from resource inefficiency, which is very important in a developing country context. So I have very much welcomed and I'm very excited about the establishment of ISSB, and I will come back to ICAP again and again to get guidance for the ESG work that we are doing, and you are a part of our task force too. And Farooq, I am indebted to you for partnering with us, and I hope we can exploit you more, because you'll pave the way for the development of not only giving input for the global baseline for sustainability disclosure and meet the needs for investor for comparability and consistency, but you'll help us in Pakistan, the Pakistani companies, to streamline their reporting, incorporating the financial disclosure requirements based from the frontier of IFRS, but then aligning it and providing that comparable information on the sustainability. I just have to technically talk about 3 important points before I share with you ESG Task Force. Few important consideration. I think it's important to keep in mind the work that's going on green taxonomy and prudential regulation and guidelines for sustainable financing instruments to ensure harmonization of standards for better understanding of issuers and investors. All of this is known to the international community, but this work is being led now by the network that I talked about, of the international network of the central bankers, which is being led initially by France, by the governor of the central bank, but now it has virtually 110 plus central banks as their members. So a lot of analytical research work has gone into it, and the IMF is partner to it, and BIS is also. Second point is, how do you really promote digitization of the sustainability data and its requirements, which will be very critical. We also need development of standards that offer cost-effective standards, not just standards, because we are a developing country. So let me conclude and share with you the ESG Task Force. It has launched a few critical meetings, and I've been very inclusive. I've had industry consultation, textile, banking, and we are having in a couple of days automobile industry consultation. KPMG is our pro bono knowledge partner that has supported the ESG Task Force. It's a joint venture between PSX and PICG. No surprise, because I'm chairing the 2 institutions, and they called on me to chair this sustainability and ESG work. And at the task force, we shared the KPMG's global survey of companies that track Pakistan's ESG assessment. Task force has developed a ESG reporting guide to encourage, of course, for us, the listed companies, to report on ESG indicators through listed companies. That will hopefully exercise discernment and diligence in adopting our ESG guide. ESG guide calls for corporates to anchor ESG in corporate strategy and plans and ensure proper recognition of materiality and ESG integration, advocate for effective resource deployment for ESG and assessment of its impact. Guide calls for integrating sustainability into risk identification, mitigation, and management in its reinforcement by analyzing use and impact of companies' operation on land, water, biodiversity, ecosystem, backed by assessing their operations, but also assessing the greenhouse gas emissions, and so on and so forth, stuff that you know very well, social and internal and external stakeholders, and of course looking at the quality of governance structure. We advocate investors to evaluate non-financial information as defined by ESG metrics alongside the financial data into investment decisions to ensure sustainable operations and long-term returns, better management of risk. ESG reporting will have to be essential for investors' oversight, seeking performance indicators as well as aiding companies in increasing their operational efficiency, and so on and so forth. ESG Task Force will, going forward, endeavor to move companies from generalities, which is now what the annual reports contain. They've got beautiful pictures there of the little kids and, of energy and the emissions, but less substance. And since everybody is reporting on different guides, so we will count on you to come up with guidance on common and harmonized approaches. so that we have manageable disclosures of a set of comparable ESG metrics and indicators tailored for Pakistan's market landscape, its contextual and regulatory requirements, because I can tell you the regulators need your advice too. I've looked at whatever they are doing. We are all behind. The ESG task force will guide alignment of PSX with the recommendations of the Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative of the United Nations and the World Federation of Exchanges, like the other 100 stock exchanges have done. We are a late starter. Contextually, this calls for nurturing a business strategy that integrates sustainability into core business of exchange itself and its companies, allocate resources for promoting a culture and action on sustainability and everything else that you know. Corporates listed on stock exchanges in governance will have to have these disclosures, but of course it'll take some time, couple of years, according to my colleagues at stock exchanges, that I'm running faster than the listed companies can move. And we will have to evaluate the ESG metrics and financial services industry to that they are indeed subscribing to the ESG principles or not in their financing. So embracing sustainability and ESG to me is a first step that Pakistan has yet to take in a bigger manner. We are not there as yet. Starting from the legislation to the ministry to coming to the technicalities of it, data will be very crucial. And who's going to invest in the data? There is no data, even of the sustainable goals. We need rigorous planning, capacity building. So our work is cut out, and I am indeed with you all, and I count on your support as we move forward, mainstreaming ESG in the stock exchange and using PICG platform to build capacities. Thank you for inviting me.